Welcome to the second part of the three-part series of my interview of Tani Canil-Sakauye, former Chief Justice of California Supreme Court and current president of the Public Policy Institute of California. Here is part 2 of 3, California's economy and future. In part 1, we talked about Tani's journey, lessons learned, and insights. In the next part 3, we will discuss election reform, federalism, and democracy. Disclaimer, I take a complete nonpartisan approach to economic policy and judicial issues. All my questions here are issue-based, not through the lens of politics or partisanship, even though I regard myself as a centrist Democrat. Thank you, Tani, so much, and welcome to part 2.
Hi, Joanne. Thank you for having me.
Sure. So here, a question about AI and regulations. AI is being widely adopted across many industries globally and is playing a significant role in reducing costs and increasing productivity. But at the same time, AI is making fake information, disinformation, as well as its distribution a lot easier, faster, and with more impact. What is the legislative balance between controlling the harm from AI-generated or facilitated false information and not killing the golden goose of AI technology?
Well, thank you, Joanne. And I'm also a no party preference on this. I don't think this issue, at least, is neither a Democrat nor a Republican problem. It is everyone's challenge in this day and age. And I'm going to also add a further disclaimer that I am not an AI expert. I've heard a lot of people talk about it. I've done a fair amount of reading. And I agree with you that AI has some truly awesome, inspiring, wonderful potential, particularly in developing countries in the medical field and in education. And I also believe that it does have inherent harms and risks, as you've mentioned, and others. And I think the legislature, which is our cutting edge lawmaking body, is really grappling with what this means. By no means are they experts either, but what they have at their disposal is the ability to convene meetings and advisory boards to learn more about what it is and where they need to create state law state law legislation to provide to the governor. So this branch of government, the legislature, they have the ability to have hearings and bring in experts who are on the pros and cons side of all of the issues that are raised by AI. They have the ability to do commissions and standing committees about this new intelligence. They have the ability to listen to companies. I think what they first need to do, though, is not first, but certainly as part of the AI discussion, is its feasibility and viability in California, where we know that AI generates an incredible surge of electrical power. So as I understand AI, when you ask a question of an application for an AI app, whether you pay for it or whether you get the app for free, it basically searches the net, like a million researchers search the World Wide Web and are looking for pieces of language and phrases that it's putting together to answer your question. But that search of the World Wide Web that's happening in nanoseconds is consuming huge, enormous, extraordinary amounts of energy, electricity. Mm-hmm. And already there's been a few articles in the papers, national and statewide, about where is this power source going to come from? We already have issues with our electrical grid in California in summers with power outages and brownouts and shutting down of the electrical power grids when there's windy weather or fire-prone weather situations. So we have to first ask ourselves about capacity. We talk about it. It is a golden goose, but the goose needs to be fed. And California is having a hard enough time with our own infrastructure to build these power plants and these data centers. And as we know, building anything in California is a challenge with all of the permitting challenges, the regulatory process, the different statutes, the payments, et cetera. If we were even going to build electrical power plants to feed the beast of AI, where would we do it? On what land would we do it? And I think if we did build it, then the data centers would follow because they want to be near the source. I mean, I think those are cousins together in community.
Mhm.
So apart from what the legislature has to think about the guardrails for AI, who can use it, when can they use it, what can be available to minors, what can be available to adults, how do you build that wall to ensure minors aren't getting into something they're not supposed to get into? In addition to teaching AI caution and critical thinking in K through 12 and beyond, maybe even in post-secondary school, what should be taught? If we're going to live in harmony with this technology that's only going to get better and faster and displace more knowledge jobs than ever before, information jobs that we thought were once safe from technology, those are the jobs now at risk. One AI app that is carefully crafted and it pertains to maybe the legal field can eliminate dozens of legal jobs, from interns to paralegals to lawyers, if we can run it and use and displace people. So there's a lot of consequences and ramifications, and the legislature has the only ability to convene and bring these sources of information together and to come to a reasonable scheme of guardrails and support. And they have to revisit it every year because it's going to change exponentially every year. The other piece I worry about with AI and what our legislature, which I'm hoping is keeping an eye toward, is the equity of AI. We have seen revolutions, industrial revolutions and advancements in tech leave behind generations of people who don't have access. So even today in California, we know from PPIC studies and surveys, there's a strong population in California that still does not have digital access. They still don't have internet. They still don't have access to remote capabilities because they live in areas that are too remote, or we don't have the infrastructure to provide the digital access to them. So there's digital equity is a problem in California. We've had funds, we've had a bill, there's major efforts yet to make that more equitable, but we still don't have it. So now we're building and advancing another component of technology, but we have to think about the people we left behind in the first round and make sure that we include them in the next, because AI has the potential to deepen the divide between the haves and the have-nots. So the legislature has a lot of work ahead of it, and they're going to need to rely on experts, and they're going to need to have public hearings, and they're going to need to start small and reassess and start again. I think it will never end. I think it's going to be one of those, it has to be a standing review and a standing committee, because it's going to overtake us. And if California doesn't do this, we know other countries are, let alone other states. We know the UK is well ahead of us. We know the EU is working hard and ahead of us. We know China, we know Japan. Other countries aren't stopping to say, what are the harms? The other countries aren't trying to stuff the genie back in the bottle. They're trying to figure out how many wonderful different ways can we employ this exciting new magic. We have to keep competitive, and we have to keep this in mind. We can't say and shut her off and say we're not doing certain things when the rest of the world will be.
Yes, and California has been known for leading the country with its innovative legislation. So I hope we are going to still leading and not falling behind. And I'm curious, what percentage of Californians still don't have internet?
I know it's at least now in the single digits, but prior to COVID and the federal effort at aid and the state effort at aid, it was in the double digits. We know now it's in the single digits, and I want to say something like 6%. I have to look at the latest PPIC survey.
I see. So next question is California's aging population. What are the anticipated consequences, and how are we going to tackle the issue? Can AI offset the shrinking productive population, since AI increases productivity and decreases labor cost?
That's a really good question. So I will start with what we know at PPIC because we do a lot of survey and data and research on this area. California, like the rest of the country, and I'm going to call out New York, is facing a truly declining population of boomer workforce. We're also, as a population, just aging on the general more so than others. So I think the numbers that PPIC looked at was by 2030, so 6 years from now, the population of Californians 65 and older will grow by 30%. And the population of people younger than 65 is not going to grow nearly as high or the same as this 30% growth for older Californians. And the interesting piece about this boomer generation, this older Californians, is our research tells us at PPIC that this population of boomer, which would include me, we are the most educated generation. The boomers have, maybe it has something to do with just our numbers, but we have the most educated cohort. We have BAs. We've all gone to, a lot of us have gone to school and we have degrees, more than any other generation. So the implications of that is this is a big brain drain. In addition to losing workers and bodies, we're losing gray matter. Brain matter is leaving the workforce. And at the same time, we also know that young people are not going to school in the numbers they used to. They're not getting four-year college degrees in the number they used to. We're worried about a generation of young people, particularly men of color, between 18 and 34, that we know from our data are not in the workforce and they're not in school. So we're not exactly sure where they are, but they're not in those two places. We're also showing that of the younger generations, more women are getting college degrees and working. And the collateral, if you spin that out, is we also know California's birth rate is flat or declining. They're not having babies anymore. And I don't know that we've tied that to because they're in school and getting education and getting careers. So births are flat and deaths are rising. And we know that deaths are rising because of one is age, one is COVID related. But nevertheless, our aging population is also passing away. So this has serious implications for our workforce. Does that mean that AI will be able to come in and take the place of that loss? Well, it may be true that there will be some information disruption and AI may be able to take up some of that slack. At the same time, though, AI does not pay taxes. So we in California have our budget built on personal income tax. A supermajority of our revenue, this is the month, the governor and the legislature have agreed to a balanced budget. They're going to sign it. June 30th will come. We'll start a new fiscal year, July 1st. That budget, in addition to all of its component parts, has a huge piece made up of personal income tax. So when a human works, like me or you, we pay a tax. But when AI takes our job and works, there's no tax benefit that goes into the general fund that helps California build its budget. So what are we going to do when that happens? I do not know. We're going to have to adjust our tax base. We're going to have to raise taxes. We're going to have to cut services. What will happen in that situation? So, and AI could actually get the work done for work that needs to happen. But I tell you, it has some consequences, and only one of them is they don't pay taxes. Your robot isn't paying a tax.
Maybe we can create a category, robotic taxes. Anyway, so next question is, related or unrelated to the aging population issue, do border crossing undocumented immigrants actually help with a labor shortage? Is it also related to political advantage, such as the number of congressional seats are based on the census? What will California do with the border crossing issue?
Well, that's a great question too. I I don't pretend to have all the answers. I don't have half of these answers, but I do know from reading and our research and work that, and living in this state, how much immigration is a key and has been a key to California's growth, our innovation, our cultural success. It makes us the go-to state because people want to come here to vacation, for example, for our food, for our hospitality, for our benefits, for a number of things that happen in California that aren't happening in, say, Arkansas, that aren't happening in North Dakota. And it's because we are a state of immigrants. And we have, PPIC has also studied and done the research that for some time now, immigration to California has been flat as well, just flat. It's not growing. And you know, there can be a number of reasons, including that we haven't yet had any clarity in an immigration policy by the federal government. As you know, immigration issues are federal in nature. So even if our governor and our legislature wanted to do something about increasing or clarifying immigration standards and status and crossings, they are unable to, they are forbidden from it because that is the jurisdiction of the federal government. So we're all waiting for Congress and the federal government to act. And they haven't been acting with clarity or with any kind of expediency. California, in my view, suffers from that. I believe that the immigrant population really does do wonders in California and supports. And we have a lot of incoming benefits with schools and aid and work efforts, but we need more, and we are limited in being able to do that. And California is one of those unique voices. We will go to Congress. We have more members in the House, and you're right. Our House representation is at risk because California's House representation, how many House members a state receives, is based on population. California's population has been ebbing and flowing. Sometimes it's down, sometimes it's even. We're not the boom state that we used to be with people coming in, can't wait to get into California. We used to be a beacon for people with 4-year degrees who came into California to work. We're less so. We do think there might be some House seats in Congress at risk if our population continues to wane. And at the same time, California needs more representation because we bring a unique voice to Congress, because we show the American dream is the California dream, and it happens in California, and it happens to people like you and me, people who don't look like the standard dream achievers.
Yes. Now, speaking of the brain drain and high-tech, high-skilled jobs, we have been relying on absorbing global talents from all corners of the world. Silicon Valley is the product of immigration, so the federal government not being able to come up with a pro-business, pro-technology immigration policy, so we can continue to draw the talents from every corner of the world is crucial. So, and that's related to other political issues and the federal government, they're gridlock. So the next question is about insurance. Many insurance companies for residential homes have left California. The lack of competition has resulted in much higher premiums for all Californians. What can be done about it?
Yeah, I wish I had all the answers, but I share your frustration with insurance and homes. As you know, if you have a mortgage in purchasing a home, the bank requires insurance. If you don't have a mortgage and you paid cash or you paid it off, insurance isn't required, but then the homeowner's putting $100,000, a couple $100,000 home at risk by not covering it with insurance. And yet at the same time, as you point out, and has been in the papers, a number of insurance companies are limiting policy renewals in California by either not renewing policies or requiring onerous conditions or leaving California and starting business elsewhere in another state. And interestingly, California has a statewide insurance czar Ricardo Lara, who is the insurance commissioner of California, who has the authority, governing power to set regulations and rates that insurance companies must abide by. And I know that he's endeavoring to do this, but when a state actually just says they're out, they don't care that you can regulate. They don't care to even work it out. They're just leaving California for all of its challenges here with insurance. That really makes the state a place of even less growth. First of all, and you'll probably get there, but you know that California is not known for affordable housing. We have a decades old housing shortage. It's been over 30 years that we have not been building enough houses or residences to house our population. And when we do, it's very expensive. And so it makes it unaffordable if you can find the housing. So you add on top of that, if you can cross and overcome those barriers, now you have an insurance quandary. You can't get it, or you have to pay very high, or you pay cash and put your $100,000 investment at risk. The state has made some effort through Ricardo Lara's office, talking with insurance companies that are willing to negotiate, and also creating the state plan for insurance, the backup plan, and I forget the name of it, but this is what the state has to do. It has to become the insurer. So, which means great risk, because definitely that's the pot that will pay out for losses when a home is damaged in a wildfire or an earthquake. And at the same time as well, getting back to what we were talking about earlier, robots and AI aren't paying taxes into the insurance protection program. And if we don't have people who are buying homes, then we're more a renter state more and more in California, where people are renting. Who's paying into the insurance pot? Only those people who can afford to buy a home. It makes it very difficult to even think about growth in California, where people can't afford to live, can't afford to buy a home, can't afford to buy a home and have a family. And then once they are able to possibly achieve that, not be able to insure that home for risk.
Yes, and that's a perfect segue to my next question about the high housing costs for Californians and exodus to other states. Californian families are leaving for other states where housing and living expenses are lower. What are the ramifications for the mid and long-term California economy? Does it lead to brain drain?
I think the short answer is yes. And I'll speak sort of anecdotally, and then I'll speak about what PPIC is doing and other good organizations know and are doing about housing and affordable housing and homelessness. And that is just anecdotally, how many of us know people who have adult children, and those adult children have moved out of state? And when those adult children move out of state, they say, I'm not coming back because I can't afford to live in California, can't afford to buy a house. So I first want to say several things, and that is buying a house, that is putting down a down payment and paying a mortgage, is one of the single greatest protections for an individual's future wealth. And it is also a source of wealth generation. Once you have a home and you have a mortgage and you've settled on a rate for your interest rate on your mortgage, you're able to save money because it doesn't go up, unlike rent. Rent goes up every year. If you've been a renter, it goes up every year, it goes up exponentially every couple of years. It's sort of like when you put your kid in college, and college tuition goes up every year. And the reason rent goes up every year, like college tuition, is because cost of living goes up. And so everything goes up, and so we pay a little bit more. So rent in California is already high across the state, and it's only going to increase. And so this puts a lot of families and couples and individuals under pressure to rent while their income is paid to rent, and it continues to rise, which means at the end of the month, they have very little to set aside for a down payment on a mortgage. So they're kind of in renter's cycle hell. You're paying to rent, it keeps going up. You have these other costs. California's high cost of living, our gas taxes, our food, and I'm not talking about the nicer parts of life, the disposable income, entertainment. I'm just talking about gas, food, and rent. And those are all going up. And so we know then that people can't afford, but we also know how hard and expensive it is to build. California's regulating process to pull a permit on a piece of property to build a home or to build a subdivision is very high, very complicated, and takes a long time. The Building Industry Association will tell you California doesn't have a home building policy. We do need to get those permits and those regulations under control if we're serious about building more residences in California.
Yes.
And it doesn't happen overnight. So it's going to be a while. And of course, now what we read about, and I don't know any about this, but I just read it like everyone else, interest rates are going up. So fewer people can qualify to put down the down payment and then continue to pay their monthly mortgage. And we also have learned that people are staying in their homes longer. So it's creating this perfect storm of very little supply, and the demand is muted because people can't really afford it because they're paying rent and they're paying high gas taxes and they're paying for high costs of living and food and all of the above. So that means that it is squeezing out the middle class, and the lower class, I guess, or the lower income folks are renting and then moving. And so I point this out. PBIC was one of the first research institutes to report last year in 2023 that we saw an exodus for the first time in California of people who have bachelor's degrees, so an educated population and an upper to middle class income are leaving California, and they're leaving. And when they leave, the first thing they do is they buy a home in the state that they're settling in. So we have a true, we're in this vice-like grip of high costs, high rent, small supply, high rates. And so it is looking more and more like California is becoming inhospitable to families and to young people.
Yes. And then that leads to the next question related: homelessness and the implementation of Prop 1. What improvement have we seen about homelessness? How can the implementation be improved? Who is accountable?
Well, I'll start with the last question. We do know that the LAO, the Ledge Analyst's Office, did a report on 2 cities, that is San Diego and San Jose, this year to determine how the $1 billion or so in affordable housing money was spent. And the LAO came away in the report saying, we don't know. And we don't know because, in part, there is no accountability. You get over $1 billion was provided to different entities to help with the homeless crisis or the unhoused crisis, and they didn't keep records and they didn't account for their success and they didn't match up whether it met with their goals. That is just unacceptable. It is unacceptable that no one can account for the billions of dollars or $1 billion that was spent, taxpayer money, on trying to fix a true humanitarian crisis in California. And what we do know is that California's unhoused population has grown. And we see it now, not only in urban areas, but rural areas. Most disturbing to me about the unhoused population on the streets is that we know that they are older people. They're people in their 50s. There are people who once had a home, once had a mortgage, once had rent, and then something happened that put them out on the streets that was brittle and unplanned and unprepared for, and they've been in the streets. And yet at one point, they were able in California to make ends meet, and then they're turned out onto the street and they're aging. And again, as we've heard, and different studies bear this out, if people didn't have a mental illness when they were turned out onto the street, they have one soon thereafter. And there are reports out there that say the only way you treat mental health is first by finding a shelter, a stable shelter where that person can receive medical services, and it can't be in a tent on a sidewalk. So we need to be accountable before any more funding is released. And we need to see concrete evidence of positive change before any more funds are released. And the governor's Prop 1 that just recently and barely passed might be a step in the right direction. It's taking, as you know, in part, some of the resources that were given to county level resources for unhoused, now providing some of it for the state. and it's going to provide housing and services, not only for drug, but also mentally ill. And jury's out. I don't know what to make of that. I don't think transferring responsibility from one government entity to another is what makes the difference. What makes the difference is accountability and getting people to report back how that money is being used and what progress is being made. And if none is made, then it means trying something different that can be positive.
Yes. Is there a mechanism for auditing the money?
Oh, absolutely. There's a mechanism. They could build it into the grant itself. We'll give you $250,000 and you report quarterly, telling us what you spent it on, telling us what your goal is, how you're going to use it, what you spent it on, and what was achieved, and why or why not was that achieved. We all account. Everybody accounts. It's a matter of being responsible.
Yeah. Why wasn't that done?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay. Another question about increase of minimum wage for California fast food workers and hotel workers and the ripple effects. A Bloomberg article on April 16th, 2024 pointed out the impact of California minimum wage hike for fast food workers on prolonging inflation and delaying the Fed's rate cut. Now, California consumers have to pay more for fast food because the increased wage was passed down to the buyers. And most of the fast food consumers are not well off. Is it a case of robbing Peter to pay Paul? Does this well-intended law result in delayed inflation recovery for everyone? Is legislation interfering with the free market?
Ooh, that's a big question. It's a loaded question. I mean, I can see the opinions on each side, but I also tend to think the data isn't in yet. California's increased minimum wage for these two areas of work is still new. It's relatively new. It didn't go into effect in April, I suppose. We don't have data on that at PPIC. I know anecdotally it sort of sounds like, well, that makes sense. If you raise wages, then the company raises prices. And when the company raises prices, it means that people won't be purchasing as often because of the added impact on their wallet. And so they're not spending as much. And so you lay people off. And then, of course, you still have high costs of living because now just even fast food is expensive. And I've also heard the argument, and I don't know if this is true, that it's misplaced law because most minimum wage workers in fast food restaurants are not people. They're usually young people, and they live at home. They're not paying a mortgage, not paying rent for the most part. So living wage matters, but maybe to an older generation of people who are actually, that is their job, as opposed to a transitory or a summer job. I've heard that argument. I don't know if it's true or not, and I think we need to wait on the data, but I certainly see that it's pretty, the anecdotes seem like low-hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm. Now, next question is about the high cost of doing business in California, which increases the exodus of businesses to other states. Many are leaving due to pro-labor legislation that burdens employers. What can the state legislators do to keep the cost down for businesses?
That's another good question. And I'm going to just, my disclaimer throughout all of this is I don't have the answers, but we have facts, and we have all have experience in some of these. I'll first start by saying that the California Labor Code, that is the set of laws that are on the books that have been passed by multiple decades of generations of legislators. So this current group of legislators and this current governor are not responsible for the labor code as people interpret it. But the labor code, the laws having to do with labor in California, which are very, very old, are all pro-employee. They're written to provide protection for the employee against the employer. And if you read California Supreme Court decisions, it's almost always a statement that the court makes in interpreting any kind of labor law case. And that is, California's labor laws, as written, are intended to be very employee protective. And then on top of the wage laws, we have regulations, including wage orders, as part of those regulations that also govern working industries. And they're also and they say so, they explicitly are protective of the employee. Now, maybe it's true that some of these laws were written at a time when unions weren't as strong, when employees did need protection from employers, because some of these laws go back to the days of child labor and when women were first introduced into the labor market and women and children were overworked. So we have a long history in California, and it pertains and continues today. And so really, you are right. California is known as being a pro-labor state. I've heard it said that the courts are pro-labor. And I always say, well, that's because the laws are pro-labor, frankly. And so businesses have a hard time, and it is rough, and it is challenging to be able to work profitably and innovatively in California under such laws. And so really it requires a revisiting, if the legislature is willing to do so, a revisiting of those laws to find a way that could perhaps in the business world's viewpoint be more balanced. But currently as written, we are and continue to be a very protective state.
Mm-hmm. Now, what does the state government need to do to keep tech giants like Google, Apple, NVIDIA, and others in Silicon Valley?
To keep them in Silicon Valley, I'm going to say again, I'm glad I'm not governor and I don't know what that is, but California has traditionally incentivized businesses, the entertainment industry, the hospitality industry, the energy industry, with tax credits. So at the end of the year or during, however, businesses can reap a benefit by certain actions by getting a tax credit that gives them an advantage to stay in California than other states. I think one of the problems is that other states compete for California's businesses. Other states, Texas, Nevada, Arizona, Florida, they come into head-to-head competition where they advertise, come to Texas, we are business friendly, pointing out that California is not business friendly because of our regulations and permitting processes. But we also provide a series of, the state, the legislature and the governor, of tax credits that have worked. PBIC did a report on some that work and some that don't. And I think the legislature continues to think about ways to incentivize businesses not only to stay in California, but to grow in California. And it's not easy because California goes back to your earlier questions. We have a high cost of living. We have high demands. We have a complex permitting and structuring process. We have a labor code that some states do not have as pro-labor. So to keep businesses in the Silicon Valley really probably means the governor needs to convene with those leaders and ask them, what does it take to keep you here? And not make any promises, but find out what they could work out to keep businesses here.
Yes. Now, budget deficits and tax increases. In the tech industry, there are fewer IPOs now and less tax from capital gains for the government. Budget deficits exist at both state and local levels. The California Supreme Court will hear arguments on the legality of a ballot measure that would strip the legislature and governor of the ability to increase taxes. Tax increases will further the exodus of companies and Californians out of California. Are there any other options for dealing with budget deficits?
Well, I will say this, the California Supreme Court recently acted to remove the Taxpayer Protection Act from the ballot. So I think it was last week. So previously the Taxpayer Protection Act, which would have required any tax increase to not only be passed by the legislature, but also to be approved by the voters. Mm-hmm. The California Supreme Court essentially said that's a revision to the amendment, cannot go on the ballot. So that was called the Taxpayer Protection Act. It was sponsored by the California Business Roundtable, and the Supreme Court just took it off the ballot. So voters won't get a chance to vote for it one way or the other. So the tax scheme that we currently have and the taxing power that we currently have in this state remains the same. And the voters don't get a chance to vote on it, at least in November. I think the California Business Roundtable basically said, okay, well, we'll be back, and they'll write something else, and that's for another day in the future. But you're right, California has always had cycles of budget deficits. We have good years, we have deficit years, we have surplus years, we have deficit years. And people joke that it kind of happens in 2-year cycles or more. The Great Recession was an anomaly. It went on for almost a decade. But the budget has deficits because our tax structure, we are highly dependent on exactly what you said, taxes. So whether it's capital gains tax, which is through IPOs and sales of investments, or whether it is through personal income tax, high wealth individuals who are here and not robots, our budget resources are every year kind of a surprise, because we have to wait till the May revise to determine exactly how much money the state brought in taxes. So by May, right? So the governor has a January proposal anticipating what kind of taxes people will pay. And in his January budget proposal, he lays out how he's going to spend the state's resources. And then the legislature gets the governor's January proposal and says, okay, well, we'll take a look, but we're all going to wait for May, because people will pay their taxes in April. And in April, we'll know exactly how much money we have. And then we'll do the May revise. Now that we know, we need to go back and revise both the governor's budget, and then the legislature is going to come up with their negotiated budget with the governor and then sign something by June. So we do know that the options for the state are few, unless we this is talked about quite a bit, unless we restructure our tax process. Should the California budget, the 5th largest economy in the world, should it be reliant every single year on the guesswork of how much personal income tax or capital gains it's going to receive every year, and then decide how to spend it every year? There's been several tax commissions. So Governor Schwarzenegger nominated at least 2 different commissions to study California's tax structure. Maybe we can avoid this boom bust. Maybe we can avoid deficits if we take a multi-year approach, if we base our taxes on something other than personal income tax. Maybe we take away personal income tax, or we reduce personal income tax, and we bring in a services tax where we tax for when I get my hair cut. We tax lawyers for the services they put out. We tax doctors for the services that they charge. A service tax. Or maybe what we do is we do a commercial tax. So if you own a home, you pay property taxes. Maybe if I own Walmart, I pay commercial property tax. So they've been looking into different buckets of funds to say, can we tax it instead of just personal income tax? So there've been some really good ideas, some great commissions. One of our PPIC board members, Jerry Parsky, a financial wizard, he served and chaired one of those commissions and came up with some recommendations. They just never been adopted.
Well, frustration with the federal political process, the legislative process, and the same at the state level. How long can we just wait until something can be done and move forward? Okay, so next question is bullet train. Well, are they ever going to be completed after 3 decades? There's a Bloomberg article. It says the world's slowest bullet train. You talk about the eminent domain, your personal history, okay? See, I left China because of their political structure of almost total disregard of individual rights, individual property rights. Okay, for them to build a bullet train, if it goes through a residential neighborhood, well, the central government has higher priorities, so we're going to bulldoze everything, of course, hopefully they will be compensated. That's it. Okay, here, well, that is a nightmare. And I don't ever want any citizen to live through that kind of nightmare. Here is the polar opposite. To get anything done, here's a bullet train issue. And do you know if they will ever be completed? Maybe in 3 more decades?
Well, at that point, won't we have a flying train? I mean, we already have driverless cars, so I don't know that a bullet train 30 years from now is going to be cutting edge technology. But more seriously, to your point, the bullet train is not anything you read much about in California. Therefore, I conclude it can't be much of a priority. It also requires a fair amount of resources and funding to pay for a bullet train. It's going to be expensive every year we wait. It's going to become more expensive. And, the reason we have eminent domain and the reason it takes a while for government to take someone's land or property, real property, and you convert it to government use is, the Fifth Amendment, which says that people are entitled to due process for the taking of their property, and they're entitled to compensation. And that's in a court, which takes time to actually resolve. And generally it resolves unhappily because government taking property for public use is always just antithetical to what we think about under our California Constitution and the US Constitution. Do I think the bullet train is going to happen? I mean, my opinion, this is not fact. My opinion is it's not going to happen. My opinion is better to cut our losses than pour more money into the train that goes nowhere.
Yes. Put good money into bad, because by the time it's built, probably there is better technology, Now, drought and water shortage due to global warming. This is not something like bullet train. It's, not urgent. We are facing an urgency. We don't have 3 decades. I mean, if we have inaction, California may turn into a desert in 30 years without we conserve water. Governor Newsom was talking about building reservoirs. What can we do to make it happen, hopefully sooner?
Yeah, that's a huge question, because I agree with you that climate change and water, related to water in particular, is urgent. And the reason it's urgent, and Public Policy Institute, where I work now, we have a water policy center, and all they do is study water, and in California. So the first thing we know too is it's not just groundwater, it's not just surface water, it's groundwater. We've been through such periods of drought that our surface water is dissipated and our groundwater has been basically used up. So we need to recharge the groundwater, and we often use the surface to recharge groundwater. Reservoirs are excellent, but they're used to capture water and to store it. And typically in times of great atmospheric rivers and storms, only we know that California doesn't regularly have, can be predicted every for winter's atmospheric rivers. We happened to have one last year, which was an anomaly coming on the steps of a long period of drought. So we do need to build reservoirs, but we also urgently need to start planning and doing, and many different, particularly in the agricultural area, they're doing a lot now of surface water recharge, groundwater recharge. They're looking at creating different entities and agencies that can share water, that can bank water. California has what they call the SGMA, the SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And this act has to be fully implemented by 2040. And you think that sounds like a long time, but it isn't, because what happens under SGMA is California, the vegetable and fruit basket of the world. We export so many crops, fruits and vegetables, but we know groundwater is in such dire trouble now that we have to have a Sustainable Groundwater Management Act by government signed into law. And it's telling us that if we complete this act and we do all the kind of urgent environmental conservation causes and steps, we're still going to have to take up to 500,000 acres of prime California agricultural land out of production. We're going to have to fallow 500,000 acres in California. If we don't meet the Act's requirements, then we're looking at up to fallowing 900,000 acres of land in California that is used to grow crops, that feeds the world. Not to mention the entire agricultural industry and the families and the generations of people who rely upon the agricultural industry to raise their kids, to pay for their health care, who live in these towns that could dry up and stand vacant and abandoned because there is no more ag. So we have urgent conservation, environmental needs before we turn into the face of the sun. We also too know that notwithstanding our drinking water and our farming water, we have a problem with our ecosystems, our biodiversity ecosystems. Our rivers are at risk. We're losing species because we don't have the right protections in our rivers and our ecosystems. So we lose species. We have to move species. Species could become extinct as a result of failing to prepare and for conservation. So at Water Policy Center at PPIC, we look at mitigation, we look at adaptation, and we work very closely with a lot of the Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley, farmers and agricultural industries to try to make sure that we can work with them on a sustainable groundwater management plan.
Yes, this is so important.